Welcome. We're really happy to have you here with us today for our coffee chat. I'm Amy Klaus, Marketing Manager at Brooks Publishing for Early Childhood Products, and I'm very happy to have Dr. Patricia Snyder and Dr. Crystal Bishop joining us today to talk about embedding instruction for young children in everyday activities and routines. Before we start, I just have a few tips to help you listen to the webinar today. So we recommend you close any applications that use bandwidth or any other resources on your computer or device. If you have any questions, you can submit them during the webinar panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll take questions at the end. If you want to minimize your webinar panel, you can click on that. There's an orange box with a white arrow in it, and that'll shrink that so you can see more of your screen. And if you do have any audio issues today, we recommend switching to phone call in the audio section. That usually helps clear up audio issues. So the slide handouts are uploaded today in the handout section of your webinar panel. And if you're unable to download those for any reason, if you're on a phone perhaps, we will send a link out to those slide handouts in a follow-up email tomorrow. Also, this session is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to that recording in a follow-up email tomorrow, as well as a certificate for your participation. So thanks again for joining us, and now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Snyder and Dr. Bishop.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here the day after a big holiday weekend. We appreciate your dedication and devotion to the topic that we're going to be discussing today, which is embedded instruction for early learning. My name is Pat Snyder, and I'm from the University of Florida, and more specifically, the Anita Zucker Center for Excellence in Early Childhood Studies. And I'm thrilled to be here with one of my colleagues today, Dr. Crystal Bishop, who also will be sharing some insights about embedded instruction later on in our webinar. I wanted to start today by providing a background for our work related to embedded instruction. And many of you on the call are familiar with, or may be familiar with, what historically has been referred to as the 3 R's of learning: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And those are certainly really important content areas for us to think about as we support the development and learning of young children from birth to age 5. But increasingly, our work over the past 10 or 15 years has focused on really thinking about what additional 3 R's might be important to think about in early learning, particularly during the first 3 years of life. And so we believe that an important foundation for thinking about embedded instruction or embedded learning opportunities to support the optimal
Sorry, it sounds like we're having a little issue. Pat, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Amy.
Okay, I think we're having
context of their everyday activities and routines alongside peers and adults is a really important foundation for the 3 R's related to reading, writing, and arithmetic. And so as we began to think about embedded instruction, we really wanted to emphasize the importance of those 3 R's and how they could be reflected in a model that we built called Embedded Instruction for Early Learning. So Crystal, if you want to go to the next slide. On your handout, we have some very brief illustrations that we think communicate very powerfully to those of us who know this information, but also perhaps to families or others who may be less familiar with this concept of repetition, routines, and relationships. And the reason we think embedded instruction is so important in the context of early learning is because it provides an opportunity for children to have repeated opportunities, that repetition, to practice important skills during meaningful everyday activities and routines in the context of relationships with materials, with adults, and with peers. And so on this very quick and simple graphic, you see some examples of the power of embedded intervention or embedded instruction. So if we think about a child who maybe has 3 or more meals or snacks a day, and opportunities to even just make 1 to 2 requests in each of those meals or snacks for for food or drink, and we multiply that times 365 days a year, what we see is the opportunity for between almost 1,100 to 2,200 learning opportunities over the course of a year. Similarly, if we think about a young infant and we think about 6 to 8 diaper changes a day and a very quick reciprocal interactional game of peekaboo during those diaper changes, again, multiplied times 365 days, we see the tremendous number of learning opportunities that present themselves for young children's development and learning. And we know from the science of early childhood development and learning that it's these relationships and repetitions within these high quality activities and routines that really do drive children's development and learning towards more optimal outcomes. So with that as a backdrop, the 3 R's of early learning, we've been working over the past 20 years or so with colleagues to develop a model for embedded instruction for early learning that I mentioned earlier. And with the help of a lot of teachers and early intervention providers and curriculum specialists and researchers and families, we've distilled down this notion of embedded instruction for early learning into what we call 4 key components. And I'll talk about those first, and then what you'll see fly in on the screen are practices that are associated with each of these 4 components. The reason we think this is important is because we know from our research that if people are implementing these 4 components, and even more importantly, they're implementing the practices that are associated with these 4 components as they were intended to be implemented, we see more improved developmental and learning outcomes for young children, and we see enhanced family capacity and confidence, that families' capacity and confidence to support the development and learning of their young children. So I'll start with the first key component, which is what to teach. And what to teach focuses on identifying and aligning, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means, target skills that we think are important for young children to have opportunities to practice in the context of everyday activities and routines. We can do this in a variety of different ways, but when we say identify and align, one thing that we think is really important when we align these skills is to think about what are the activities and what are the characteristics of the activities and routines in which young children interact in their everyday lives, and how we can align target skills that we think are important for children to become more independent, more participative, more engaged within those everyday activities and routines. In addition, those target skills also should be aligned with what it is we think are important skills for all young children to know or be able to do. And those skills might be represented in things such as early learning foundations or early learning guidelines or standards. So it's really important to think about what are those skills that are most important for this particular child to know or be able to do to help them be more independent, more participative, more engaged in their everyday activities and routines, and ultimately to support their development and learning. The second practice that's associated with what to teach then is developing what we refer to as priority learning targets. And priority learning targets are the statements, the specific written statements of what it is that we want children to practice, the skills we want children to have opportunities to practice in those everyday activities and routines. The second component of embedded instruction, once we decide what it is we're going to teach or support, then we have to think about when we're going to teach. And this involves identifying those high quality activities or routines that are going to offer logical or natural opportunities for embedded intervention or embedded instruction. And later on, Crystal's going to talk briefly about a tool that we use. We call it an activity matrix, and other people, of course, use activity matrices in their work as well. And the activity matrix is an important tool because it helps us link the what we're going to teach and fitting that, what we're going to teach, into logical or natural activities and routines where it makes sense to have the opportunities to practice those skills, because those skills are important to the expectations or characteristics of the activities and routines. So embedded instruction isn't about just sticking a skill into an activity or routine, but it's giving careful consideration to what are the skills, as I said earlier, that best can be addressed in the context of a specific activity or routine, because it's logical and natural for that activity or routine, and because it will support repeated opportunities for the child to practice that skill in a natural and logical context to meet the activity characteristics and expectations, so they can be more participative, more independent, more engaged, and more motivated to learn, quite frankly. The third component of embedded instruction is, once we know what we're going to teach and when we're going to teach it, we think about how we're going to teach. And that really involves implementing what we call systematic support for those embedded learning opportunities by using systematic instructional procedures. And we're going to briefly talk about today a framework that we use where we look at the A's, the B's, and the C's of embedded instruction learning trials, and we call those complete learning trials. And we're going to have an opportunity to see a few examples of what these learning trials look like in the context of embedded instruction. It's important to acknowledge that complete learning trials are happening all the time, every day, in multiple ways for young children. What distinguishes them in the context of embedded instruction is that they're specifically focused on those priority learning targets in those activities and routines and transitions that we think are logical or natural fits for embedded instruction. And then the final component of embedded instruction is how to evaluate. And so once we know what we're going to teach and when we're going to teach it and how we're going to teach, then we have to think about how we're going to evaluate whether or not embedded instruction is implemented as intended. So that means, are we as adults or learning facilitators for young children providing those opportunities, those embedded instruction learning opportunities, in the way that we intended to provide them? And if we are doing that, is it working for the child? Meaning, is the child making progress? Are they learning those important skills that we've identified as part of the what to teach process? And then you see that this is a cyclical process, so that the cycle starts again by identifying new targets, new activities, new routines, new transitions, new ways of exposing children to those complete learning trials, and then new ways of thinking about monitoring our implementation and measuring child progress. So these are the 4 important components of when we say we're implementing embedded instruction, whether that's at school or whether that's at home. These are the 4 kinds of things we want to think about: what we're going to teach, when we're going to teach it, how we're going to teach, and how we're going to evaluate it. And then again, on the right-hand side, you see the 6, what we call essential embedded instruction practices. And when we implement these practices as intended, we have fairly robust and convincing evidence that young children make good progress on the important skills or behaviors that are priorities for their teachers, for their caregivers, and even for the children themselves. So, Crystal, we can move on to the next slide.
All right. Thanks, Pat. So I'm going to show some examples of tools that we have developed and have helped preschool teachers and families be supported to use to really plan for and implement embedded instruction. So we're going to start with an example actually of an activity matrix, which Pat was mentioning is one of those essential practices. So you should be seeing an example of a classroom activity matrix, and this is an example from a preschool classroom. So what we see is that we have 3 children that this teacher has planned to provide embedded instruction for. And so down the left-hand column, she has listed the activities in her schedule. And then in the cells of this table, we can see different priority learning targets. And these are really just short hand versions of the priority learning targets. So what these really represent are children's target skills. And so we have here within an activity matrix, one thing that's really nice about these tools is that they are really versatile, so they can be made to be designed in many different formats. Sometimes they're on whiteboards or they're done using Post-it notes and put on the wall, but they always have who the child is, what the priority learning targets you're focused on are, and the activities where you're going to embed instruction. We'll see some other examples in just a moment that have some additional information on them as well. But an activity matrix for embedded instruction always has these three things. And so we're going to look in just a moment we're going to take a look at Mia. So Mia is 4 years old, and she attends an inclusive preschool classroom. This is the full priority learning target for one of her targets. So she says that she'll label the color of an object when asked by an adult during table games and snack. And so we're going to watch just a really short snippet of her participating in these activities with her teachers and peers. You can also see that in this priority learning target, we have some information about how we'll know whether she's making progress. So we can see that we want for her to label colors in 4 out of 5 opportunities for 2 or more activities on 3 consecutive days. And that's really getting to that how to evaluate piece of embedded instruction. And then in the highlighted cells, you can see that the teacher we're getting ready to watch in these 2 activities, she had planned to provide 2 opportunities for Mia to label colors and 2 opportunities for her to make a request using 1 word in each of the activities we're going to watch. So we're just going to play the video. It's 2 minutes long, and be looking for the times where the teacher is embedding instruction on these 2 priority learning targets.
And Crystal, I think too, if folks could think about why these 2 activities in terms of their characteristics and the way that they're structured seem like they provide logical times for Mia to work on labeling colors.
Okay. And my computer's thinking, just a moment. Okay, I believe we've got it.
Green, Roger, could you pass James the green one? That's green. Way to go, friends.
And if you're, Mia is the little girl with the glasses. She's wearing a green shirt and a black vest.
Open them up. Alex opened his. It's kind of tight. Oh, I got mine. I have purple. Kind of tight. Good thing. Help. I heard Mia. You are welcome. What nice manners. Here, would you be in charge of the stampers, Alex? If somebody wants a stamper, they can ask Alex. Okay. Tap them on the shoulder. Okay. Stamper. Oh, Mia's asking for a stamper. You can put. Oh, nice giving. You did it. Tricky. Oh, Mia, I got another stamper. Mia, what color? Red. That's right, it is red. Here's a red A. What are you doing? that's right. You have a lot of goldfish in this bowl, though, friend. I think maybe Mia needs a bowl. Thank you. Now Mia can put some goldfish in her bowl. And everyone, my friend Sadie's in charge of it. Mia, what color bowl is this? Green bowl, you're right. And a yellow one. You got the same one as us?
So, as I watch that, Pat, one of the things that always strikes me, and we watch this video a lot, is, you mentioned that when we think about complete learning trials, we're not just talking about, sticking something in just because we can. So it's very easy to say, well, what color is it? Or to, prompt a child. But when and we're also not waiting for opportunities to happen. So when I think about embedded instruction, I really think about that intentional piece to it. And that, it's recognizing how to create those, what we often call teachable moments, rather than taking advantage of them when they happen to come up. So when I watch this video, I see that these teachers have done some very intentional things to set the occasion for me to have opportunities to practice those skills. And I know one of the things that you had said to think about was the characteristics and expectations of the activities. So I wonder if you want to talk just briefly about, how those fit together with the strategies that the teachers were using.
Right. And so I think this is an interesting example, right? Because in order to participate in table games, you don't necessarily have to be able to label colors of objects, but you might want that to be a characteristic or expectation. If a child wants to express preferences for particularly a preschool age child, as we all know, I want the pink one, or I want the red one, or I want the yellow one, right? So clearly those adults, as you said, had what we call engineered the environment to provide those more intentional opportunities for Mia to label colors. I also thought that the teacher did a nice job of talking about color, even when they were trying to open the tops of the Play-Doh. So she was modeling the use of color language as something that you do in that particular tabletop activity. And there were certainly different colored objects that were available, not only the stampers, but the tops of the Play-Doh itself, etc. And so it seems to me like that's a good example of something that might not necessarily be a natural fit, meaning that it's not required for participation or being an expectation of the activity, but it certainly can enhance the quality of the language that's going on in the activity for all children. And also simultaneously provide opportunities for Mia to have practice identifying colors in an activity that she seems to be motivated to be participating in alongside her peers. In the snack time routine, again, I think what we see is some very careful planning in the environment about having different colored bowls available during snack time. And we just saw a very brief snippet of what you and I know is a much longer clip, where there are multiple opportunities for the children to be talking about the colored bowls and which bowls they like the best. And again, Mia's ability to label green and yellow provides the opportunity for her to be able to participate in conversations with peers about what bowls they like and what color bowls they like the best. So.
And I think, we started with this looking at an example in a classroom setting. So when we were looking at some of the comments and questions that folks who have registered had asked ahead of time, there were several questions about supporting families to be able to use these strategies as well. And so in our work, often we find that we are supporting families to really think about those environmental arrangements, but also to just think about how they can embed opportunities within their daily routines at home without placing a lot of extra burden and planning on the family. So really just helping them think through what their routines are. So the next tool that we have to show you all is actually a home activity matrix. So I'm going to pull that up now. And so this is, I believe, I hope. We're thinking again.
Unfortunately, folks have these also in their handouts.
Yes. So,
and for people like me who need the bigger print, you might want to look at your handout.
Yeah. So what we're looking at right now is, again, it's a home activity matrix. And so this is something that the teacher and the family have worked together to develop. And so this is for a child who's really working on using her fingers and wrists to twist lids on or off. And what we can see that's a little different about this activity matrix is that it actually includes the strategies that the family is going to use. And what we like about this tool is that it's meant to facilitate that home and school collaboration. And it represents all of the components of embedded instruction on it. So if we look at the what right now, that's our what to teach. When we look at the family routines and the activities within, that's the when to teach. And then our what do we do or say is our how to teach component. And down here on the bottom, we have how to evaluate. And so if we take a look at one way, this is just a still image, but we can see that this family is really thinking about how they can embed opportunities for Lydia to open up her paint jars. So they've chosen materials intentionally to set up these opportunities. And then this is a family that also, not every day, but a few times a week involves Lydia in helping to bake or cook dinner with them. And so we can see in this example, she's decorating cupcakes, but her mom has allowed her and has planned for her to be the person who opens up the cupcake sprinkles. So again, just an example of how you can start to bridge from school to home and really support families at home. And then the next example that we have is an early intervention example. So, and we have a video for this one. So what we're getting ready to watch is a video of an early intervention provider. This is a recent video. She's doing a virtual home visit with a father of a 2-year-old. And this child, his name is Jack. His learning target is to ask for more by signing more using another sign. And so what we are going to see is they're just a very brief bit of their dinner time. And you'll see both how the provider supports dad to deliver a complete learning trial and how dad executes the learning trial within their dinner time. So I will pull up that video.
So it looks like those oranges are pretty motivating to him right now. So maybe the next time, leave it just out of reach and wait a few seconds and let's see if he'll do the sign more on his own.
Good job saying more.
Nice job, Jack.
That was perfect. So I like you put it right in front of him so he could see it, and you waited a few seconds and he said it, and then you did a really nice job of saying, nice job, more, and giving it right to him. Nice job, Dad. That was excellent.
Right.
Every time I see something like that, I think about A, how quickly those complete learning trials happen, and B, how many hundreds of them, probably even thousands, happen in the context of a simple activity or routine, right?
Yeah, and what I really love about that one is that she's coaching him through it, so we can really see all the parts of that complete learning trial. So we can see her prompt him really clearly to, you know, move the food out of the way and to wait for Jack to sign it, and then that once he delivers, like once he gives him the food and gives that consequence for Jack signing it, how excited they both are. And so, you know, I think that's just a really perfect example of how the intervention provider is really facilitating that, but making sure that dad is aware of all of those pieces of the complete learning trial that happened, so that he'll be able to continue to do that. And she's not in the home at all. She's doing that virtually, so that's even better.
Right. And it seems like he might be ready for a new what to teach, since not only was he signing more, but he was saying more, right? So that starts
Absolutely.
that cycle all
Yeah.
over again.
So I'm also, again, having trouble getting the slides to show up, but really what we had left to talk about and to kind of get folks going in terms of discussion is on the last page of your handout. We have a QR code with a that you can scan, and it also has a link. Your handout is linked to these resources, but we have a project at the University of Florida, or that the Anita Zucker Center is doing, that's called the A to Z's of Early Childhood. And we have several resources around everyday learning opportunities, and the embedded instruction resources are under letter I, which is focused on inclusion. So if folks want to browse those, that's a place where you can go to get resources that we think will, I know lots of folks were asking about resources that they could share with families. And so these are designed to support practitioners or family members to use some of the strategies that we've talked about today. So I think at this point, we are ready to have a chat.
Great. Thank you so much, Pat and Crystal. That was really nice, especially seeing the videos, really seeing it in action really helps. I am going to uh, I'll take the controls back and show my screen just to do, we have a couple slides before we start our Q&A. But if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat right now, and we'll take those questions in just a few minutes. So I wanted to let everyone know that we're giving listeners, 3 listeners will get a copy of the Building Blocks for Teaching Preschoolers with Special Needs book. This is the book that has some information on embedded learning opportunities and kind of is a nice complement to the content we've learned today. Also, for everyone listening, you can receive a 20% off discount code on any Brooks products you're interested in ordering. Coffee Talk is the code to use, and you can just use that through the end of June. We have a whole archive of coffee chats with Brooks, with various authors on many different topics on early childhood. So I encourage you to check that out to look. We have 2 more live events this week, tomorrow and Thursday, and then there's a whole archive over the last 2 months. So I really encourage you to check those out if you haven't joined us before. And then also we've gathered some resources to help professionals during this time. There's some recommended reading, there's some resource activity handouts you can share with parents, and there's also some more links to other webinars that might be helpful. So now, if you have any questions, please go ahead and type those into the coffee chat, or in the coffee chat. the handouts, I think I have a couple questions that have come in. Let me see. Just to remind everyone, we are recording this, and there will be a recording tomorrow. And the link to the handouts will also be in an email tomorrow. And about the giveaway, everyone who's listening right now or who listened and even already left will be automatically entered. So we're just going to do a random draw of everyone who attended live, and then we'll reach out via email to confirm an address for shipping those books. So if you're listening right now, you're automatically entered. There's nothing special that you have to do. So, okay, so we have a couple questions from listeners. One question is there a location where you have more videos available to share with colleagues or families, especially with regards to distance learning and supporting families?
Yeah, so one of our actual highest priorities at the moment is building out a library of videos. So some ways that you can access those. We are in the process at the moment of making actually some more examples of the virtual home visits. And so those will be posted in that under letter H in the where that QR code leads you to. So those will be H is for home visiting in that initiative. And so you can find those there very shortly. They're in their final stages at the moment.
I know there were some folks also on another webinar we did a number of months ago from New Jersey, and we're working in early intervention in New Jersey, and they contacted us and asked if they could use the E materials, the letter E for everyday learning opportunities within their early intervention system. And the answer to that is yes, of course. Those are up on the A to Z's portion of our center's website and available for downloads and sharing and use by those of you who are interested. I think in the home visiting under the letter H, as Crystal mentioned, we also have developed some just very brief but informative handouts, very attractive handouts, we hope, for families and for providers who are doing virtual home visiting. And so those are also going to be posted under the letter H on our website. We've developed those in collaboration with the Early Steps, the Part C early intervention program here in the state of Florida. So those are up or will be up soon, as Crystal mentioned, on the website. And they just provide practical tips around lighting and how to pace during a home visit, a virtual home visit like the one we just saw, where the provider was being very intentional, as Crystal mentioned, about ensuring that the father had a real good understanding of how those house strategies were being used with Jack and supporting opportunities for him to practice requesting more.
Thank you.
And I don't know how to, I don't know if there is a way to put those into the handout portion of the chat today, Amy, but we are happy to share them because they'll be posted to a public domain anyway. So
okay, yes, I can put a link to where your QR code goes. I can put that link in the follow-up email tomorrow, so that should help people get to it.
And the handout that everyone has is already linked up to that, so you should be able to access it from the handout.
Oh, it'll click. Okay, so you can try clicking right through if you downloaded that PDF from your panel. We have a listener who's asking, do you have a questionnaire that you start with that asks about the family's typical routines and activities? As those may vary by family. And if you do you have a version you could share or one to recommend?
We have used a lot of the work that Julianne Woods has done around family guided routines-based intervention. And so rather than a formal questionnaire, we really engage in more of a focused conversation with families as we begin to think about those 4 aspects of embedded instruction that Crystal and I discussed earlier. We find that it's helpful, more helpful often to start with what are families' priorities for their children's development and learning, and then talk about those with respect to what are their typical activities and daily routines, and how we can identify those opportunities for fit. Otherwise, in our experience at least, we have found that families are not really completely understanding why we're asking for detailed information about what happens from the time a child wakes up until the time that a child goes to bed at night. So, other people may have other different perspectives about that, but we find that just an informal conversation that grounds the caregiver to that framework that Crystal showed you, as we think about, identifying what those priority learning targets or skills are that families would like their children to know or be able to do.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have found is really important is, once you have a sense of just what their day, like what the routines are that they do every day, and as you start to kind of drill down and identify times of day that it might be feasible for them to practice skills, that's usually when I start to say, things like, if they've identified that a mealtime is a time that they want to practice with their child, then I ask more questions around, well, can you tell me a little bit about what mealtime looks like? So what happens first, or which parts of mealtime is your child already involved in? Because I think that's where you start to find when they really have opportunities to practice, and also you start to have that dialogue around what do they feel they're able to do? So what's feasible for the family? Because I think that is different. Even if the routine is similar across families, their capacity within those different routines is different.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think also we have a tendency to think about mealtime as one thing. And if you think about mealtime, there are multiple little subroutines or sub-activities that occur within the context of mealtime. So again, really important to think about, as Crystal said, what are the expectations and characteristics of those larger activities that we call mealtime? What happens from the beginning of mealtime, to the end of mealtime, because there may be differential opportunities even within a particular type of routine or activity like mealtime. So I think, Amy, you're just, or somebody's showing or driving the A to Z's, but when you get there,
Yes.
when you get there, just again, you can press on any of those tiles. If you click on any of those tiles, you'll see A, for example, is for access. B is for behavior. We have a lot of information, as you might imagine, around social emotional foundations for early learning and preventing and addressing challenging behaviors. So we have some resources there and links to other resources that we believe are evidence-based and research informed.
And there is actually in letter E, there's a download that actually talks about different routines, and is something that could be shared or used as a talking point. So I think it's, if you scroll down to the first little accordion, the first strategy, there's a download there. Yep.
This one?
Okay. Yep. And it really just talks about what are routines and what are different kinds of routines, but that could also be used as something to facilitate that conversation, because it gives examples of different types of routines. So it's helpful for providers, it's helpful for families, and it's really meant to be a tool that can be used to facilitate that dialogue between people in different contexts that support the child.
Great, thank you. See. So, and we'll include again a link to that site that's on my screen in the email tomorrow for everyone. We did have one of the listeners just wrote, could you mention again where on this webpage to find the videos? Are the videos that you showed today in this, if I go back?
They are not yet. They
Okay.
will be they are being captioned so that they will be finalized. So they should be up in the next week or two. And but they'll be under letter H.
Other H. Okay, great. Yeah, I love the format. It's very friendly of that page. Go back to other questions. We'll just take one or two more questions. One of our listeners said they really like the format of the embedding at home activity matrix. Do you have any other examples of the home activity matrix?
That just have maybe for different skills?
I think so, or I don't know if they have, does the website have blank ones? Maybe the person's asking if they could kind of make their own.
Yeah, we could share that. Yeah.
Okay.
And we have it as it's a fillable PDF. So, and that's actually a brand new tool. So we will be excited to have folks use it and to tell us how it's worked for them.
Yeah, if they have, particularly if anybody is going to use it and wants to send Crystal or me feedback about it, we would really appreciate that. Crystal's getting ready to embark on a 3-year study of building some tools for families around embedded instruction. And so we would really like to get feedback about some of the things, the tools that we're developing and sharing with you all so that we can improve them even further for use with and validation by families and providers like yourselves.
Great. And one listener is asking if she's allowed to use the website and the resources there as part of her teacher trainings in her programs. That's okay?
Yes. Yep, absolutely.
Great.
And I
All
think,
right.
again, so this is also something that y'all can, at the bottom of that homepage, you can sign up for emails. So you will then get notified as new content goes up. So we're still making content, and this is a continual process. So you'll get updates about that. The other thing that I would encourage folks to do is to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, because we, in the last several weeks, we have released several really short videos that again show examples of, for example, skills that you could teach at bath time or when you go for a walk, and those are all linked to our Facebook page or our Twitter account. So, and you have those handles as well in your handout.
And they're deliberately kept very short. They're all under
videos.
Yeah, they're all under about 2 minutes, and we did that deliberately because we really want to illustrate how powerful this is and can be, even within short snippets of opportunities within an activity and routine. But we also would like for you all to help interpret what's going on with your knowledge around embedded intervention as you work side by side with families. And they're short and they don't require a lot of time, but they certainly can start a conversation that you can engage in with families that can be much more extended and tailored and individualized.
Great, thank you. We're receiving lots of thank yous through the chat box. So people are saying this was very helpful and very useful resources on the website. So that's
well, and as with it, we specifically said related to the home activity matrix, but we always value feedback about these resources, and we really hope that this will be a place where practitioners and family members and really anyone can go for high quality information. So both of our emails are linked to your handout, and we really would love to hear from you. So if you have other suggestions or feedback about the tools that you find, please share them with us.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening today. And thank you very much, Pat and Crystal, for this great presentation.
You're welcome.
Everyone has a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.